The hum of the early morning at John F. Kennedy International Airport was a symphony David Miller knew by heart. It was a familiar, constant drone of distant jet engines, the rhythmic click-clack of luggage wheels on polished floors, and the low murmur of anticipation and farewells. For Officer David Miller, a K-9 handler with 10 years on the force, this was his daily office, a vast, intricate ecosystem of human stories unfolding around him. And at his side, as always, was Rex, his loyal German shepherd, a majestic creature with intelligent, observant eyes and an unwavering focus that was a testament to years of rigorous training. David and Rex were a unit, a silent, efficient partnership. Rex, a veteran of countless patrols and drug busts, was usually a picture of stoicism. His movements were fluid, deliberate, his senses acutely tuned to the subtle shifts in the airport's sensory landscape. Today, their patrol was routine, sweeping through Terminal 4 past the bustling check-in counters and the rows of tired but eager travelers. David, a man in his late 30s, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that held a quiet weariness, but also a deep sense of commitment, walked with the easy confidence of someone entirely comfortable in his skin and his role. He knew the ebb and flow of the airport, the telltale signs of nervousness, the fleeting expressions of joy or anxiety. But Rex, in his own way, saw more. He smelled more. They were passing a cluster of self-check-in kiosks when it happened. A woman, her back to them, was meticulously tagging a vintage leather suitcase, its surface worn smooth with age, adorned with an array of colorful travel stickers that hinted at a storied past. She was elegant, dressed in a tailored cream suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Nothing about her appearance immediately screamed suspicious. Yet, as they drew level, Rex, without warning, halted. His powerful body tensed, a low guttural growl rumbling in his chest. And then he barked. It wasn't a playful yip or a warning bark at a squirrel. This was a deep, insistent, almost furious bark, directed squarely at the old suitcase. It echoed through the otherwise subdued hum of the terminal, drawing immediate attention. Heads turned. A few conversations died down. David felt a prickle of unease. Rex rarely barked without a profound reason. His training was impeccable, his instincts near infallible. "Rex, easy," David murmured, his voice low, trying to calm the dog, even as his own heart began a slow, insistent thrum. He tugged gently on the leash, but Rex was unyielding, his magnificent head lowered, nose pointing directly at the suitcase, his barks intensifying, sharp and urgent. The woman at the kiosk, startled, spun around. Her face, previously composed, was now a mask of alarm. Her eyes, wide and dark, darted from Rex to David, then back to the suitcase, a flicker of something unreadable, fear, indignation, crossing them. She was Eleanor Vance, according to the tag on her carry-on, and her destination board read, Flight 707 to San Lorenzo. A small, remote island nation known more for its tax havens than its tourist attractions, and crucially, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. "Is there a problem, officer?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight, a tremor barely detectable beneath her cultured accent. She clutched the handle of her carry-on bag, her knuckles white. "My dog seems to be interested in your luggage." "Ma'am," David replied, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing. He was well-versed in reading body language. And Eleanor Vance radiated a nervous energy that was almost palpable. It wasn't the usual pre-flight jitters. It was something deeper, more frantic. "My luggage. That's ridiculous. It's just Clothes? I'm going on a trip. Her denial was a touch too quick, a shade too vehement. A few airport security personnel, alerted by Rex's persistent barking, were already approaching, their expressions a mix of curiosity and routine readiness. Officer Jenkins, a younger, less experienced officer, was among them. "Everything all right? Miller Rex having an off day?" he asked, a hint of a smirk on his face. David ignored him, his focus entirely on Eleanor and the suitcase. "Rex doesn't have off days, Jenkins," David stated, his voice firm, not breaking eye contact with Eleanor. "He's alerting on something." Eleanor's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for reassurance, for anything but David's steady, interrogative gaze. "This is absurd. I'm going to miss my flight. Can't you just let me go?" "There's nothing in there." She made a small, almost imperceptible gesture towards the suitcase, as if to dismiss it, but her hand trembled slightly. David knelt, his hand running along Rex's taut back, feeling the tremor of his muscles. Rex continued to bark, his nose now nudging insistently at a specific corner of the vintage suitcase. There was a desperate urgency in his barks now, a pleading note that David had rarely, if ever, heard. It wasn't just a detection, it felt like a warning. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my partner here is highly trained. When he alerts like this, it means there's a strong probability of contraband. We're going to have to conduct a secondary inspection," David explained, his tone calm but unyielding. He knew the protocol. He also knew Rex. This wasn't a false alarm. This was something significant. Eleanor's face paled. Her carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "No, you can't. You have no right. I haven't done anything." Her voice rose, attracting more attention. A small crowd of curious onlookers began to form, phones already being raised to record the unfolding drama. "We have every right, ma'am, for the safety and security of everyone in this airport," David countered, standing up slowly, his height imposing. He gestured to Officer Jenkins and another security guard. "Take the suitcase to the private search area, and please escort Miss Vance." Eleanor let out a small, choked gasp, a sound of pure terror. She stumbled backward, bumping into a nearby queue barrier. "You don't understand. You have no idea what you're doing." Her voice was no longer just tight with anxiety. It was laced with genuine, raw fear. "You'll regret this. All of you will." Her outburst only served to solidify David's resolve. He had seen fear before, the fear of getting caught, but this was different. This was the fear of something far greater, something beyond the immediate consequences of a drug bust or a money laundering scheme. This was the fear of an invisible, looming threat as Jenkins and the other officer moved to take the suitcase. Eleanor made a sudden, desperate lunge for it, her eyes wild. "No, don't touch it, please." Her plea was raw, unhinged, startling in its intensity. She was quickly restrained, her struggles weak against the two officers. Rex, seeing her desperation, let out another series of sharp, almost frantic barks, as if trying to communicate a deeper message, a warning that transcended mere contraband. He strained against his leash, his focus unwavering on the vintage suitcase as it was wheeled away. Eleanor Vance being led, protesting vehemently. After it, David watched them go, a knot forming in his stomach. He patted Rex's head, the dog finally calming slightly, though his eyes remained fixated on the direction the suitcase had been taken. "Good boy. Rex, what did you find?" "Huh. What's so special about that old case?" he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. He knew that the upcoming inspection would either confirm Rex's incredible instinct or brand this as the most spectacular false alarm of their career. But David had a gut feeling, a deep, unsettling certainty that something far more significant than a routine bust was about to unfold. Rex's silent cry, his unprecedented urgency, spoke of a secret that was not just illegal, but truly shocking. The air in the terminal, once a familiar hum, now felt charged with an unspoken tension, pregnant with the weight of an impending revelation. He could almost feel the eyes of the curious onlookers on him, a silent, collective anticipation. What was inside that suitcase? The question hung heavy in the air, a whisper of a brewing storm. The private search area, tucked away from the main concourse, was a sterile, brightly lit room designed for efficiency and discretion. The air, devoid of the terminal's constant hum, felt unnervingly still. David led Rex into the room, his gaze immediately falling on the vintage suitcase now resting on a stainless steel inspection table. Eleanor Vance stood a few feet away, flanked by two security officers, her face a pale, determined mask. Her eyes, however, betrayed her, darting anxiously towards the suitcase, then towards the door, as if contemplating a desperate escape. "Officer Miller," spoke Agent Thorne, a man from Airport Security Command, whose crisp uniform and steely gaze reflected years of climbing the bureaucratic ladder. He was known for his adherence to procedure and a healthy dose of skepticism when it came to K-9 alerts that didn't immediately reveal obvious contraband. "Are you absolutely certain? Miller Rex has never been wrong, but this is unusual. A vintage suitcase, no obvious scent, and Miss Vance seems quite distressed." David felt the familiar pressure of doubt from his colleagues, a subtle undercurrent that always accompanied an unusual K-9 alert. He'd faced it before, especially when Rex indicated something more nuanced than a straightforward drug or explosives find. Agent Thorne, with all due respect, Rex is consistently reliable. His alert was strong, insistent. There's something in that suitcase that he's reacting to, something beyond the usual. David's voice was calm, but his jaw was set. He trusted his partner implicitly, more than he trusted any machine or human intuition. Rex, sensing the tension, gave a soft whine, his gaze fixed on the suitcase. Eleanor Vance, catching Thorne's skeptical tone, seized the opportunity. "Exactly. This is a complete waste of time. I am a reputable businesswoman, traveling on legitimate business. My flight is due to board in 30 minutes. You're harassing me based on a dog's whim." Her voice, though still trembling, was gaining strength, edged with indignation. She was playing the part of the unjustly accused, a tactic David had seen countless times. But the raw terror he'd witnessed in her eyes moments earlier lingered in his memory. "Ms. Vance, we appreciate your cooperation," Thorne interjected smoothly, a placating tone in his voice. He glanced at David, a silent message passing between them. "Are you sure you want to push this?" Miller. David met Thorne's gaze squarely. "I'm certain. Agent, Rex isn't just whimming. This is a trained detection, and it's a strong one. We need to open it." Thorne sighed, a barely perceptible gesture of annoyance, but he nodded. "Very well. Proceed with the inspection. Officer Jenkins, please document every step." Jenkins, who had been observing with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, moved forward with a camera. "Right away. Agent." David approached the suitcase, Rex still at his side, a low rumble occasionally vibrating in his chest. The suitcase itself was a marvel of antiquated design, its leather straps and brass buckles hinting at journeys spanning decades. The travel stickers, from exotic locales to mundane business hubs, were faded but legible. A tapestry of a life well traveled. Nothing about it felt inherently illicit. Ma'am, do you have the key or combination for this lock? David asked Eleanor, his voice neutral. Eleanor hesitated, her eyes flickering towards the suitcase, a desperate war playing out behind them. For a moment, David thought she might refuse, but then, with a sharp intake of breath, she recited a combination. Her fingers twitched, as if she wanted to reach out and stop them, even now. David carefully entered the numbers with a soft click. The brass clasps sprang open. He took a deep breath, preparing for the familiar scent of narcotics or the metallic tang of explosives. But there was nothing. The suitcase was filled, meticulously and tightly packed, with what appeared to be ordinary clothing: silk scarves, cashmere sweaters, tailored blouses, all neatly folded, interspersed with small toiletry bags. There was no overwhelming scent, no telltale bulge, no hint of anything illegal. A wave of relief washed over Thorne, quickly followed by a look of exasperation directed at David. Jenkins lowered his camera, a faint smirk returning to his lips. Just as Miss Gore, Vance said, "Miller, clothes. Looks like Rex finally had that off day." Eleanor let out a shaky breath, a mixture of relief and a renewed surge of indignation. "See, I told you. Can I please board my flight now?" David, however, was not convinced. Rex was still agitated, though less vocally so. He was now sniffing intently around the inner lining of the suitcase, his nose twitching, his tail a stiff, almost imperceptible vibrate. He wasn't barking, but his body language screamed alert. "Rex is still indicating," David said, his voice flat. Ignoring Thorne's obvious annoyance, he began to methodically remove the clothing, piece by piece, laying them out on an adjacent table. Each item seemed innocent, mundane, but as he emptied the suitcase, he noticed something. The bottom of the suitcase wasn't just fabric. It was unusually rigid, almost like a false bottom. He ran his hand along the lining, pressing and feeling. There was a faint, almost invisible seam, expertly disguised. It felt slightly different from the rest of the lining. It was too firm, too structured for a simple base. "There's a false bottom here," David announced, his voice tight with growing certainty. Thorne's expression shifted, a flicker of curiosity replacing his skepticism. Jenkins looked intrigued. Eleanor, watching from across the room, suddenly went rigid, her face draining of all color. Her earlier indignation vanished, replaced by a profound, chilling dread. She was no longer just nervous. She was terrified. "A false bottom," Thorne repeated, stepping closer. "Are you sure, Miller?" David didn't reply. He carefully examined the seam, searching for a latch, a button, anything that would give access. It was seamlessly integrated, a testament to intricate craftsmanship. He tried pressing along the edges, feeling for a weak point. Rex, meanwhile, was now pawing gently at a specific spot along the false bottom, a low whine escaping him. David followed Rex's lead, pressing where the dog indicated, and there it was, a tiny, almost imperceptible switch, camouflaged within the weave of the fabric. He pressed it. With a soft, mechanical hiss, a section of the false bottom slowly retracted, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. The air in the room seemed to hold its breath. Inside, nestled in custom-fitted velvet, was not drugs, nor weapons, nor stacks of cash. It was a complex, multi-layered mechanism, an intricate assembly of gears, springs, and miniature levers, all crafted from what looked like aged brass and polished dark wood. It was beautiful in its complexity, like a miniature clockwork marvel, but its purpose was entirely unclear. There were no obvious spaces for anything else, no secret pouches within the mechanism itself. It was just the mechanism. Thorne leaned in, his brows furrowed. What in the world is that? Miller. Some kind of antique gadget. Jenkins. Always quick with a quip. Whistled. Looks like something out of a steampunk convention. Is it a fancy music box that plays nothing? Eleanor Vance, however, had collapsed onto a nearby chair, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her eyes were fixed on the revealed mechanism, not with surprise, but with a deep, crushing defeat. It was the look of someone whose worst fears had just been confirmed. David, ignoring the comments, felt a sudden, inexplicable jolt. The craftsmanship, the specific arrangement of the gears, the vintage aesthetic. It all sparked something in the back of his mind. A faint, almost forgotten image. A detail from a cold case file he had briefly reviewed years ago floated to the surface. It was a file he had dismissed as a dead end. A case so complex and unique it had almost taken on the aura of urban legend. He leaned closer, examining the intricate work. There was a small, almost microscopic emblem etched into one of the brass gears, a stylized serpent entwined around a laurel wreath. It was a detail he'd seen before, on a single, grainy photograph in that old file. This isn't just a gadget, David said slowly, his voice laced with a growing realization. He turned to Thorne, his eyes wide with a dawning understanding. Agent, do you remember the Ethelred Emerald heist? From what? 10, 12 years ago. The one they never solved. Thorne blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in topic. The Ethelred Emerald Miller. That was a legendary case, a multi-million-dollar jewel, disappeared without a trace, believed stolen by some ghost syndicate, never found a shred of evidence. What does that have to do with this contraption? The methods, David murmured, running a finger along the aged brass. The whispers about the syndicate. They were known for bespoke concealment, incredibly intricate, unique mechanisms designed to hide things in plain sight. This emblem, I've seen it on police reports detailing other high-profile thefts, cases that were linked to that same ghost syndicate, but never officially connected due to lack of hard evidence. Eleanor Vance, who had been silently weeping, suddenly looked up, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. Her earlier fear of simply being caught was nothing compared to the profound dread that now consumed her. She knew exactly what David was talking about. She knew the emblem, the air in the room, already thick with unspoken tension, now crackled with a new, dangerous energy. What had started as a routine K9 alert on a suspicious suitcase had just taken a dizzying, terrifying turn into the realm of international crime, legendary heists, and a syndicate believed to be untouchable. Rex, still by David's side, let out a soft whine, then gently nudged David's hand with his wet nose, as if silently confirming his handler's chilling realization. The flicker of doubt in the room had been extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard truth. The revelation hung heavy in the air of the sterile inspection room. The intricate mechanism, previously a mere curiosity, now pulsed with a sinister significance. David Miller's mind raced, connecting the fragmented pieces of a long-dormant puzzle, The Ethelred Emerald heist wasn't just another unsolved case in the annals of criminal history. It was a legend, a jewel so rare and valuable it had become almost mythical, and the syndicate behind it, whispered about only in hushed tones, was considered an untouchable ghost. Agent Thorne, usually unflappable, stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the device in the suitcase. The initial skepticism had evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization that mirrored David's own, the Ethelred Miller. Are you absolutely sure? The serpent emblem? That's impossible. They said that Syndicate left no trace. They left whispers. Agent, David corrected, his voice low, his eyes still scanning the delicate gears. Whispers about their craftsmanship, their unique methods of concealment. This is that method. This isn't a storage device. It's a decoy. It's too complex, too intentionally designed to be the actual secret. It's designed to look like the secret, to distract, to make you believe you found something significant, when the real secret is still hidden. Eleanor Vance, slumped in the chair, began to tremble violently. Her earlier defiance had completely crumbled, leaving behind only raw, primal fear. No, no, you don't understand. This is a mistake. Let me go. You don't know who you're dealing with. Her words were barely a whisper, but the terror in her voice was chilling. Ms. Vance, David said, turning his full attention to her, his voice firm but not unkind. You know what this is, don't you? You know who made this? Who are they? Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. I can't. They'll kill me. They'll kill everyone I know. Her eyes darted to Rex, who was sitting patiently by David's side, occasionally letting out a soft, concerned whine. Even the dog seemed to sense the profound fear emanating from her. Ms. Vance, if this is connected to the Ethelred Emerald, then we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise. You're in deep. Cooperate with us now. And we can protect you, Thorne interjected, his tone suddenly more serious, recognizing the gravity of the situation. The stakes had just escalated exponentially. Eleanor merely continued to shake her head, burying her face in her hands. The weight of her secret was crushing her. David, meanwhile, turned back to the suitcase. He ran his fingers along the inner lining again, not just the false bottom, but the entire interior. If the mechanism was a decoy, then the real secret had to be hidden even deeper, even more cleverly. He remembered stories of these syndicates, their legendary patience and their pathological attention to detail. They didn't just hide things, they integrated them. He moved his hands slowly, systematically, along every inch of the fabric. His fingers brushed against something, a tiny, almost imperceptible bump, no larger than a grain of rice, nestled deep within the stitching of the lining. Near the handle, it was so small, so perfectly integrated, it would be impossible to detect without meticulous, almost obsessive inspection. He pressed it gently. Nothing. He pressed harder, wiggling it. Still nothing. Frustration flickered within him. Was this just a stray thread? A loose piece of fabric? Rex, who had been watching intently, suddenly nudged David's hand with his nose, then let out a soft, almost imperceptible woof. His eyes fixed on the tiny bump. It was the same corner of the suitcase he had originally barked at. With such fierce insistence, David looked at the dog, a fresh wave of conviction washing over him. Rex wasn't wrong. He was never wrong. David took a deep breath, focusing. He remembered the reports, the descriptions of the syndicate's methods. They didn't use obvious triggers. They used subtle ones, often requiring specific, non-obvious pressure points or sequences. He tried a different approach. He didn't just press. He twisted, slightly, meticulously, with the barest amount of pressure, the way one might subtly adjust a tiny screw, and then a faint, almost inaudible click echoed in the quiet room. A tiny, impossibly thin slot, no wider than a hairline, appeared on the inner seam of the suitcase, right next to the small bump. It was so fine. It was practically invisible to the naked eye unless one knew exactly where to look. David carefully inserted the tip of a small, blunt tool, a non-metallic plastic probe used for sensitive inspections, into the slot. He wiggled it gently. With another soft pop, a miniature panel, no bigger than a postage stamp, recessed inward, perfectly flush with the lining, and from the incredibly tiny cavity within, David carefully extracted something almost unbelievable in its smallness, a micro SD card. It was barely visible, thinner than a fingernail, utterly unassuming. It could easily have been mistaken for a stray piece of dust or debris, but the meticulous effort taken to conceal it, the elaborate decoy mechanism above it, all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. This tiny chip held secrets of immense value, secrets worth killing for. A collective gasp filled the room. Thorne's eyes widened in astonishment. Jenkins, who had been taking notes, stopped writing, his pen hovering midair. Eleanor Vance stared at the micro SD card as if it were a venomous snake, a mixture of horror and resignation washing over her face. A micro SD card. Thorne breathed, his voice a mixture of awe and trepidation. All that for this. He pointed to the elaborate brass mechanism, now fully exposed beneath the false bottom. The mechanism was a distraction. Agent, a red herring, David explained, holding the tiny chip carefully between his thumb and forefinger. It was designed to be found, to make us believe we'd uncovered the main secret, while the real evidence, the true leverage, remained hidden. He glanced at Rex, who had settled down, his tail now giving a single, contented wag. The dog's job was done. He had found it. He had seen through the most elaborate of deceptions. This changes everything, Thorne said, his voice grim. He knew the implications of finding such a device, especially if it was indeed linked to the Ethelred Emerald Syndicate. This wasn't just airport security anymore. This was a matter for federal agencies, for intelligence services. Ms. Vance, David said, his voice now devoid of any pretense. What is on this card? And what exactly is your connection to this syndicate? Eleanor, seeing the tiny card, finally broke. The dam of her composure shattered. All the fear, the desperation, the years of living under an unbearable weight, burst forth. She began to sob, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. It's everything. She choked out between gasps for air. Everything they've done, their network, their operations, their money laundering schemes, the names, and the location. Location of what? Ms. Vance Thorne pressed, his voice sharp with anticipation. Eleanor lifted her head, her eyes bloodshot but now blazing with a desperate resolve. The location of the Ethelred Emerald, and all the other treasures they've stolen. Their vault. It's all on that card. I've been trying to escape them for years. They held my family hostage. This was my only chance, my only way out. A silence fell over the room, heavy and profound. The sheer scale of the revelation was staggering. This small, unassuming micro SD card, found because of a dog's inexplicable bark, contained the keys to dismantling a global criminal empire. David looked at Rex, who was now resting his head on David's knee, looking up at him with those intelligent, knowing eyes. Rex hadn't just smelled contraband. He had smelled the truth, the history, the fear, the desperation clinging to that suitcase. He had sensed the immense weight of the secret it carried, a secret that Eleanor Vance had been forced to bear alone. His bark wasn't just an alert. It was a desperate, canine plea for justice. The routine morning at JFK had become the epicenter of a sprawling, decades-old conspiracy, and it had all begun with a dog's bark at an old suitcase. The truth, finally unveiled, promised to shock not just everyone in that room, but the entire world. The tiny micro SD card, no bigger than a fingernail, felt impossibly heavy in David Miller's hand. It was an unassuming chip, yet it hummed with the weight of decades of hidden crimes. A testament to the K9's uncanny intuition, Agent Thorne, usually composed, was now pacing the small room, his face etched with a mixture of disbelief and intense focus. Eleanor Vance, still weeping softly, had finally gained a fragile composure, her eyes fixed on the card as if it held both her past torment and her future freedom. "This is unprecedented, Miller," Thorne stated, stopping his pacing to stare at the small chip. "The Ethel Red Emerald has been a ghost story for a generation of law enforcement. To think it could be tied to this and found like this." He shook his head, a mixture of awe and frustration in his voice. "And that mechanism, a pure masterpiece of misdirection. Only a genius or a sociopath could conceive of such an elaborate decoy." David nodded, his gaze still on the intricate brass contraption inside the suitcase. The craftsmanship isn't just about hiding, it's about deceiving. It's designed to be complex enough to satisfy initial inspection, to make us believe we'd found the big secret, while the real information, the truly incriminating data, remained hidden in plain sight. It's a signature. Thorne, a very specific, very rare signature. He paused, a flicker of memory stirring. Years ago, as a rookie officer, David had been fascinated by unsolved cases, particularly those that bordered on the mythical. He remembered spending countless late nights poring over cold case files, trying to find a pattern, a detail that others had missed. The Ethel Red Emerald heist had been one such obsession. The official reports had been scant, frustratingly vague, but the whispers in the police barracks had been rich with speculation. A shadowy, anonymous syndicate, artisans of deception, leaving no fingerprints, no witnesses, only an untraceable void where priceless artifacts once stood. He recalled a grainy, almost abstract photograph in one of those old files, taken by a forensic team at a secondary crime scene linked to a seemingly unrelated jewel theft in Europe that was later speculatively connected to the syndicate. It was a close-up of a shattered piece of a custom-made lock, recovered from a safe, and barely visible on a tiny fragment was an emblem, a serpent entwined around a laurel wreath, just like the one etched into the brass mechanism in Eleanor's suitcase. "There was an emblem," David finally said, verbalizing the memory, "on a piece of a recovered mechanism from a theft in Brussels about a decade ago. It was dismissed as a unique artisan's mark at the time, but it looked just like this one." He pointed to the minuscule engraving on the brass gear. The report mentioned the incredible precision, the almost artistic quality of the internal components. It was unique. No two pieces exactly alike, but always with that underlying design philosophy. Thorne's eyes widened. "Brussels. I remember that case now. High-value diamonds, also vanished without a trace. It went cold fast. They never connected it definitively to the Ethelred Syndicate. Not officially. It was just speculation, because there was never any concrete evidence. David countered, "Until now, this suitcase, this mechanism, that micro SD card, it's the concrete evidence. And if Ms. Vance is telling the truth about its contents, it's everything." He looked at Eleanor, who was now slowly nodding, her face still tear-stained, but with a new, quiet determination. The act of confessing, of finally sharing her burden, seemed to have released a fraction of the immense pressure she had been under. "Ms. Vance," Thorne began, his voice gentler now, recognizing her vulnerability. "We need to know everything. Your connection to them, how you got this card, and what exactly is on it." Eleanor took a deep, shaky breath. "My name is Eleanor Vance. My father was a brilliant clockmaker, an artisan. He was coerced into working for them when I was young. He designed these mechanisms, these decoy devices. They threatened our family, forced him to use his genius for their dark purposes. When he died, I inherited his legacy. They made me continue his work, transporting these items, ensuring their assets remained hidden." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I hated every moment. I spent years, every spare moment, meticulously collecting evidence, their names, their shell corporations, their offshore accounts, the locations of their hidden caches. I documented everything. This card is my life's work, my father's revenge, my freedom." She gestured towards the micro SD card. The mechanism in this suitcase was a prototype for a new series of delivery systems. They were testing it for a major transfer. I knew this was my last chance. I hid the true data chip within the lining, knowing they'd only check for the elaborate mechanism. I planned to get to San Lorenzo, upload the data from a secure location, and disappear. But your dog... She looked at Rex, a flicker of something akin to awe in her eyes. "Your dog saw through it all." Rex, as if understanding, gave a soft woof, nudging David's hand. David understood. Rex hadn't just smelled contraband. He'd smelled the unique, almost organic scent of the aging leather combined with the microscopic residue of the rare pigments and ancient materials the Syndicate often dealt with. He'd smelled the metallic tang of the specialized tools used to craft such intricate devices. And perhaps the faint, almost imperceptible pheromones of human fear and desperation that clung to Eleanor and the suitcase. Rex's enhanced olfactory senses, combined with his specialized training, allowed him to perceive anomalies far beyond human capability. It was more than just a bark. It was a complex, multi-layered detection of anomaly and distress. "So, this syndicate is still active?" Thorne asked, his mind already racing with the implications. "And they're still using these methods?" "More active than ever," Eleanor confirmed, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a mixture of residual fear and nascent defiance. "They're global now. They move stolen art, antiquities, even historical documents. The Ethelred Emerald is their crown jewel, their symbol of untraceable power. It's hidden in their main vault, deep within their leader's private estate in the Swiss Alps." The mention of the Swiss Alps and a private estate sent a shiver down David's spine. This was no petty theft. This was the dark underbelly of a global elite, operating with impunity, protected by layers of influence and wealth. "The leader," David pressed. "Who is he?" Eleanor hesitated, her eyes wide with fear again. "His name is Julian Thorne. she whispered, her voice barely audible. A highly respected philanthropist, art collector, a titan of industry. No one would ever suspect him. He uses his legitimate businesses as fronts, his influence to silence investigations. He's ruthless. And he's expecting this suitcase to arrive in San Lorenzo. If it doesn't, he'll know something is wrong. He'll send someone. The gravity of Eleanor's words hung heavy. This wasn't just about recovering a stolen jewel. It was about dismantling a powerful, dangerous network led by a seemingly untouchable figure. And Julian Thorne's reaction to the missing suitcase would be swift and brutal. Suddenly, the intercom in the private search room crackled to life. Agent Thorne, Officer Miller, urgent call on line 1 from Director Hayes, Federal Task Force, says it's critical. Thorne exchanged a grim look with David. The news of the K-9's discovery had clearly already reached the highest levels. The Ghost Syndicate was no longer a ghost. It was now a tangible, terrifying reality. This is just the beginning, David murmured, looking from the micro SD card to Eleanor, then to Rex, his loyal, vigilant partner. The quiet morning at the airport had erupted into something far bigger, far more perilous than anyone could have imagined. The hunt was on, and they were now caught in its deadly crosshairs. The private search room, once a mundane space for routine inspections, now felt like the nerve center of a brewing storm. The urgency conveyed through the intercom, Director Hayes's direct call, solidified the terrifying new reality. The Ghost Syndicate was no longer a phantom. It was real. It was powerful. And thanks to Rex's extraordinary detection and Eleanor Vance's unwitting help, they were now squarely in its crosshairs. Agent Thorne quickly took the call, his voice shifting from an almost disbelieving tone to one of clipped professionalism. David could hear the low murmur of Thorne's side of the conversation, peppered with phrases like confirmed K-9 alert, micro SD card, and direct link to the Ethelred Emerald. The news was already rippling through the highest echelons of federal law enforcement. Eleanor, watching them, seemed to shrink into herself, her earlier brave defiance replaced by a chilling realization of the peril they were now all in. They'll know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Julian Thorne, he'll know the suitcase didn't arrive. He'll send Silas. David turned to her, his brow furrowed. Silas, who is Silas? Eleanor flinched, as if the name itself was a physical blow. He's their enforcer, their cleaner. He's relentless. If Thorne suspects anything, Silas will be dispatched. He won't stop until he recovers the card and eliminates anyone who knows about it, including me, and now, including you. Her eyes, wide with fresh terror, darted between David and Rex. The image she painted was vivid, terrifying. A man who erased problems, who left no trace. David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He wasn't just a K-9 handler anymore. He was a potential target. And so was Rex. Thorne hung up the phone, his face grim. Director Hayes is mobilizing a full federal task force. They're sending a team here immediately. They want that micro SD card secured and Ms. Vance taken into protective custody. This is bigger than anything we've dealt with at this airport. Silas is coming, Eleanor interjected, her voice filled with a desperate urgency. He's fast. He's efficient. You don't understand how dangerous he is. He operates in the shadows. He knows how to disappear people. She was pleading, her words tumbling out, fueled by pure, unadulterated fear. You can't just wait here. He'll be here before your task force even clears the tarmac. David felt a profound moral dilemma bloom within him. Protocol dictated that they secure the evidence and wait for the federal agents. But Eleanor's terror, her palpable, bone-deep fear, felt genuine. He had seen enough desperate people to know when fear was real, not just a performance. And the idea of this Silas slipping into their controlled environment, unseen, was a chilling thought. "How do you know he's coming so fast?" David asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Thorne has eyes everywhere. He has sources in every major airport, every port. He monitors everything. The moment that flight to San Lorenzo is delayed, the moment the suitcase isn't scanned, he'll know, and Silas will be activated." Eleanor's voice was a frantic whisper. "He's probably already on his way. He doesn't waste time." Thorne, however, was still rooted in procedure. "Ms. Vance, we have security protocols. We are at JFK. We have federal resources being deployed. You will be safe here until the task force arrives." His tone was reassuring, but it lacked the raw understanding that David felt in his gut. But David kept thinking about Rex. Rex hadn't just barked at a hidden object. He had barked at the essence of a threat. He had picked up on the residual fear clinging to the suitcase, the silent cry for help that Eleanor couldn't voice. Rex's unusually persistent and frantic barks now made perfect sense. He was alerting not just to contraband, but to the imminent danger surrounding it. "Agent Thorne," David said slowly, his eyes fixed on the anxious woman. "Eleanor's fear feels real. This isn't just about a stolen artifact anymore. This is about a syndicate that apparently operates with impunity, and a cleaner who disappears people. If what she says is true, waiting here might put her and us at greater risk." Thorne scoffed. "Miller, we are law enforcement. We don't run from threats. We contain them. Our best course of action is to secure this room, wait for the task force, and follow established procedure." He was firm, resolute, but David couldn't shake the image of Rex's desperate barks. What if Rex had sensed something they couldn't? What if Eleanor's inside knowledge, her desperate plea, was their only warning? He looked at Eleanor again. Her eyes were pleading, begging him to understand, to believe her. "He won't just come for me, officer. He'll come for the card. And if you have it, you're a target. And the dog." She glanced at Rex, a flicker of genuine concern for the animal. "He doesn't care who gets in his way." The thought of Rex, his loyal partner, being caught in the crossfire of this ruthless syndicate sent a jolt of protective instinct through David. He knew Rex was trained for danger, but this felt different. This was a shadowy organization, not a street-level bust. "What do you propose, Ms. Vance?" David asked, ignoring Thorne's incredulous look. Eleanor's eyes lit up with a desperate hope. "There's a safe house, a former contact of my father's. It's not affiliated with the syndicate. It's remote, discreet. It was meant to be my escape route, a place to upload the data. If we go there, now, immediately, before Silas knows we have the card, we might have a chance. We can upload the data, send it to the authorities, and expose Thorne and his entire network before he can react." Thorne exploded. "Absolutely not, Miller. This is insane. Taking a witness, leaving a secured facility, going to some safe house. That's a direct violation of every protocol. You'll be derelict in your duties." "Or," David countered, his voice quiet but firm, "we'll be preempting a potentially catastrophic situation. Agent Thorne. She has inside knowledge, if Silas is as good as she says. Waiting here is a sitting duck. We have the intelligence. We have the evidence. We need to act on it quickly before they can counter. He looked at Rex, who seemed to be watching him intently, as if waiting for his decision. The dog's silent communication was clear. Trust me. Trust her. We need to move. The internal conflict raged within David. Every fiber of his training screamed protocol, but every instinct, fueled by Rex's uncanny foresight and Eleanor's raw terror, screamed danger. He had always relied on his gut, on his connection with Rex. And right now, his gut was screaming louder than any protocol. What's the address of this safe house? Ms. Vance, David asked. Making his decision, Eleanor's face, though still pale, showed a profound relief. It's a cabin in upstate New York, near a town called Willow Creek. It's unmarked, off-grid. No one would find it unless they knew exactly where to look. She quickly rattled off a set of coordinates and a vague description. Thorne stared at David, aghast. Miller, you can't be serious. You're risking everything. Your badge, your career, your life, the dog's life. Or I'm protecting all of it. Agent, David replied, his eyes resolute. And more importantly, I'm protecting the evidence that can bring down a global criminal enterprise. This isn't about rules anymore. This is about justice and staying alive long enough to see it through. He looked at Jenkins. Officer Jenkins, secure this room. Inform the arriving task force that Ms. Vance is being relocated for her safety and the security of the evidence. Tell them we're proceeding to a secondary, more secure location for data upload. Do not, under any circumstances, reveal the actual location to anyone who isn't Director Hayes personally. Emphasize the critical nature of the information she holds. Jenkins, though surprised by the sudden shift in command, looked at David's unwavering resolve and simply nodded. Understood. Officer Miller. David then turned to Eleanor. Can you walk? She nodded, pushing herself up from the chair, though her legs still seemed shaky. Yes, I can. Thank you. Officer, thank you. Her gratitude was profound, desperate. We need to move quietly, David instructed, his mind already formulating a plan. No alarms, no unnecessary attention. We'll use the service tunnels. Rex, stay close. As they moved towards a discreet service door, a new, chilling thought occurred to David. Julian Thorne, the philanthropist, the art collector, the same last name as Agent Thorne, standing right there. It was likely a coincidence, a common name, but a flicker of unease, a tiny seed of doubt, had been planted in David's mind. In a world of hidden secrets and double lives, nothing could be assumed. The air outside the private search room, once a distant threat, now felt like a palpable, lurking danger. They were stepping into the lion's den, but at least, this time, they were moving on their own terms. The decision hung in the air, a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. Agent Thorne's face was a mask of disbelief and anger, but David's resolve was unyielding. He had made his choice, trusting his gut, and more importantly, trusting Rex. The subtle, almost imperceptible click of the service door closing behind them was the sound of a line being crossed, a departure from protocol into uncharted, dangerous territory. David moved with a quiet urgency, Rex padding silently at his heels. Eleanor, still shaky but fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline, followed closely. The service tunnels of JFK Airport were a labyrinthine underworld, a stark contrast to the gleaming, public concourses above. The air was cool and metallic, smelling of concrete and distant machinery. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with their hurried movements. Stay close, Miss Advance, David instructed, his voice low. These tunnels are a maze, and we need to be invisible. Eleanor nodded, her eyes wide, constantly scanning their surroundings. I know these tunnels. My father. He sometimes used them for discreet deliveries. There's a discreet exit near the old cargo bays. It's rarely monitored. Her knowledge, born of a life entangled with the syndicate, was now their most valuable asset. They moved swiftly, their footsteps echoing faintly in the cavernous passages. David kept a hand on Rex's harness, the dog's senses acutely tuned to their surroundings, his ears swiveling, picking up sounds far beyond human hearing. Rex was their early warning system, a living, breathing radar against unseen threats. As they navigated the dimly lit corridors, David's mind raced, replaying the events of the last hour, the vintage suitcase, Rex's frantic barks, Eleanor's raw terror, the intricate decoy mechanism, and finally, the tiny micro SD card holding the fate of a global syndicate. It was a dizzying escalation, a rapid plunge from routine patrol into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. How long until Silas would know? David whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant hum of the airport. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, her eyes haunted. He's fast. Julian Thorne has a network of informants. He'll have someone monitoring flight manifests, baggage scans. The moment my flight is delayed, the moment the suitcase isn't processed, he'll be alerted. He'll know something is wrong. Silas will be activated within minutes, not hours. And how does Silas operate? David pressed, needing to understand the nature of their pursuer. He's a ghost, Eleanor replied, her voice trembling. A former Special Forces operative, dishonorably discharged. He uses his military training, his contacts in the black market. He's a master of disguise, infiltration, and elimination. He doesn't leave witnesses. He's precise, methodical, and utterly ruthless. He moves through the shadows, leaving no trace. The description sent a chill down David's spine. This wasn't just a criminal. This was a professional, a predator. Their escape through the service tunnels, while seemingly discreet, was only a temporary reprieve. Silas would be hunting them, and he would be relentless. They reached a junction, a wider tunnel leading towards the cargo bays. Eleanor pointed to a heavy, unmarked steel door. This is it. It leads to a rarely used access road behind the old cargo facility. We can get a cab from there, or I can call a contact. No calls. David immediately countered. Anything traceable could compromise us. We'll take a cab. Less traceable than a private contact. He pushed the heavy door open, revealing a desolate, concrete access road, bordered by a chain-link fence and a few parked, rusty cargo trucks. The morning air, crisp and cool, felt like a breath of freedom, but also a stark reminder of their vulnerability as they stepped out. Rex suddenly tensed, his ears swiveled forward, his body rigid. A low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of deep suspicion. He stared intently at a dark, unmarked van parked a few hundred yards down the road, partially obscured by a stack of empty crates. "What is it, boy?" David murmured, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. Eleanor followed Rex's gaze, and her breath hitched. "That van, it's one of theirs. It's Silas. He's here. He knew." Her voice was a terrified whisper. David swore under his breath. Silas was faster than they anticipated. He had anticipated their move. Or perhaps he had simply been waiting, watching the airport's various exits, a silent sentinel. The thought that Thorne might have subtly delayed them, or even given Silas a hint, flashed through David's mind. but he quickly dismissed it. Thorne was a stickler for rules, not a conspirator. Silas was just that good. "Run!" David yelled, pushing Eleanor forward. "To the fence now!" They sprinted towards the chain-link fence, Rex running ahead, his powerful legs eating up the asphalt. The van's engine roared to life, its tires squealing as it peeled away from the curb, accelerating rapidly towards them. "There's a gap in the fence. Further down," Eleanor shouted, pointing to a section where the chain links were bent and broken. A crude escape route. As they ran, David risked a glance back. The van was closing in, its dark windows reflecting the morning light like predatory eyes. He could make out a figure in the driver's seat, a silhouette of cold efficiency. Silas. Just as they reached the broken section of the fence, a shot rang out. The bullet whizzed past David's ear, embedding itself with a sickening thud into a concrete pillar behind them. Silas wasn't just pursuing. He was actively trying to stop them. Permanently. "Get through," David urged Eleanor, pushing her through the gap. Rex, with surprising agility, squeezed through after her. David followed, tearing his uniform on a jagged piece of wire. They tumbled onto a patch of overgrown weeds and discarded industrial debris. Landing hard. The van screeched to a halt on the other side of the fence. David scrambled to his feet, pulling Eleanor up. "Which way to the road?" "Through here." Eleanor pointed to a narrow, overgrown path winding through a thicket of trees. "It leads to a residential street, a few blocks away. We can blend in there." They plunged into the dense foliage, the sounds of the airport fading behind them, replaced by the rustle of leaves and their own ragged breaths. Rex, ever vigilant, led the way, his nose to the ground, sniffing for any sign of pursuit. The path was uneven, littered with roots and rocks, making their escape difficult. David could hear the sounds of crashing through the undergrowth behind them. Silas was on foot now, pursuing them through the trees. He was relentless, just as Eleanor had warned. "He'll have a tracker, or he'll know the area." David gasped, his lungs burning. "We can't outrun him forever." "I know," Eleanor panted, her face flushed, a grim determination replacing her earlier terror. "But we have to try. The safe house is our only chance." They burst out of the thicket onto a quiet suburban street, lined with neat houses and manicured lawns. A few early morning joggers looked at them with surprise as they stumbled onto the sidewalk, disheveled and breathless. "Act normal," David muttered, trying to straighten his uniform, though it was now torn and stained. Rex, sensing the need for discretion, walked calmly beside him, though his ears were still swiveling. Listening for any sign of Silas, they walked briskly, trying to appear as if they were simply out for an early morning stroll. Despite their obvious distress, David scanned the street, looking for a taxi, any vehicle that could get them away. Then he saw it, a yellow cab, pulling away from a house down the street, its for-hire light illuminated. "There," David pointed, pulling Eleanor and Rex into a desperate sprint. They flagged down the cab, the driver looking at them with a mixture of confusion and annoyance at their disheveled appearance. "JFK Airport, Terminal 4, David said, trying to sound calm. As he bundled Eleanor and Rex into the back seat, he knew it was a risk, going back to the airport, but it was the quickest way to get out of the immediate vicinity and onto a major road. As the cab pulled away, David looked back. The suburban street was quiet, seemingly empty, but he knew Silas was out there, a shadow, already planning his next move. The micro SD card, tucked securely in David's inner pocket, felt like a ticking time bomb. Willow Creek, upstate New York, David told the cab driver, giving him the general direction. And take the longest, most circuitous route you know. We're in no hurry. He then pulled out his phone, his hands trembling slightly as he dialed Director Hayes's direct line. He needed to update them, to warn them about Silas, and to ensure Eleanor's information about Julian Thorne was taken seriously. He knew this was just the beginning. The escape from JFK was only the first skirmish. The real battle, the desperate race against time to expose a powerful, ruthless syndicate, had just begun. And at its heart was a K9 dog, a vintage suitcase, and a tiny chip holding a truth that would shock everyone. The yellow cab became a temporary sanctuary, a flimsy shield against the gathering storm. As they sped away from the airport's outer perimeter, David, Eleanor, and Rex huddled in the back seat, the hum of the engine a nervous counterpoint to their ragged breathing. David had just finished a tense, clipped conversation with Director Hayes, relaying the extraordinary events and Eleanor's terrifying warnings about Silas. Hayes, initially skeptical, had been swayed by David's unwavering conviction and the sheer audacity of the syndicate's methods. "He's taking it seriously," David confirmed to Eleanor, lowering his phone. "A federal task force is being redirected, but they're still hours away. Hayes understands we had to move." Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery, the suburban homes giving way to endless stretches of highway. Silas won't give up. He's probably already tracking the cab. Or he's got eyes on every major road out of the city. He has contingencies for everything. Her voice was still laced with fear. But there was also a stark, unsettling understanding of their enemy. "How would he track us?" David asked, his mind already running through scenarios. "We didn't use our phones. He doesn't need to track you specifically," Eleanor explained, her eyes wide with a chilling knowledge. "He just needs to know what he's looking for. A K9 officer, a civilian woman, a German shepherd, in a yellow cab, leaving the vicinity of JFK, shortly after an alert. That's a highly specific profile. He'll have eyes on every exit, every major highway intersection, every toll booth. He'll be coordinating with a network, watching for exactly that." David felt a cold dread creep in. Silas wasn't just a hitman. He was a strategic operative, capable of anticipating moves and deploying resources. This was far beyond anything he'd encountered in his career. His police training felt inadequate against an enemy this sophisticated and ruthless. Rex, sensing the shift in their mood, nudged David's hand with his wet nose. A silent reassurance. His presence was a grounding force, a constant reminder of the incredible instinct that had plunged them into this nightmare. "We need to ditch this cab," David declared, looking at the driver. "At the next rest stop, we'll find another way." The cab driver, oblivious to the high-stakes drama unfolding in his back seat, pulled into a busy highway rest area filled with families, truckers, and weary travelers. It was a chaotic scene, perfect for blending in. David paid the fare, his eyes scanning the parking lot, searching for any sign of a dark van or an out-of-place figure. "What's the plan?" Eleanor asked. Her voice hushed. "We need a vehicle that won't stand out," David replied, his gaze settling on a used car dealership sign flickering in the distance. "And we need to change our appearance quickly." They moved through the rest stop like shadows, heading towards a small convenience store. Inside, David grabbed a few basic items: a baseball cap, dark sunglasses, a plain hoodie for himself. For Eleanor, he picked out a wide-brimmed hat, a loose, shapeless jacket, and a pair of cheap sunglasses. They couldn't change their clothes entirely, but these small alterations might be enough to throw off a casual observation. As they paid, David kept an eye on the entrance, his hand resting subtly on Rex's head. Rex, usually calm in public, was unusually alert, his ears constantly twitching, his nose sniffing the air. He was searching. 2. They walked out into the bustling parking lot, trying to appear nonchalant. Suddenly, Rex stiffened. A low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled in his chest, his eyes fixed on a black sedan with tinted windows, parked near the far end of the lot. The car was idling, its engine a low purr, and no one was visibly inside. But Rex was alerting. "He's here," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Silas, he must have changed vehicles. He's watching us." David's heart pounded. They had been seen. Silas was already ahead of them. The discreet rest stop had become a trap. "Walk. Don't run," David instructed, his voice low, deceptively calm. "Towards the dealership. We need to act normal." They began to move, every step an exercise in controlled panic. David could feel the unseen eyes on them, a cold, predatory gaze. He risked a glance back at the black sedan. The driver's side window was now slowly lowering, revealing nothing but darkness within. It was a silent, chilling confirmation. They reached the edge of the dealership lot, filled with rows of shiny, pre-owned cars. "We need to act fast," David said. "We'll buy the first car we can, cash, something common, unremarkable." Inside the dealership, a young, overly enthusiastic salesman immediately pounced on them. "Can I help you folks? Looking for a new ride?" "Yes," David replied, forcing a smile. "Something reliable, cheap, and we need to drive it off the lot today. Cash." The salesman's eyes lit up at the mention of cash. He led them to a plain, silver sedan, a model so common it blended into any streetscape. It was perfect. While David handled the transaction, Eleanor kept a lookout, her eyes constantly darting, her body rigid with tension. Rex, meanwhile, sat quietly beside David, his gaze fixed on the entrance, a silent guardian. The paperwork felt agonizingly slow. Every minute that ticked by was a minute closer to Silas. David could almost feel his presence, a chilling pressure on the back of his neck. He paid in cash, signing the documents with a fabricated name, a precaution he'd learned from countless police thrillers. Finally, with the keys in his hand, David ushered Eleanor and Rex into the silver sedan. As he started the engine, he saw it, the black sedan, now pulling slowly into the dealership parking lot, its tinted windows still opaque, a silent hunter closing in. "He's here," Eleanor gasped, her hand clutching David's arm. "Hold on," David muttered, flooring the accelerator. The silver sedan screeched out of the dealership, tearing onto the highway, leaving the black sedan in its dust. They drove for hours, heading north, towards the upstate New York wilderness. David drove aggressively, taking obscure back roads, making unexpected turns, using every evasive driving technique he knew from his police training. He constantly checked his rearview mirror, but the black sedan was nowhere to be seen. Silas was either incredibly good at staying hidden, or he had given up the immediate chase. Knowing he had other resources, as the cityscape receded and the landscape transformed into rolling hills and dense forests, a tense silence settled in the car. Eleanor, exhausted, eventually drifted off, her head resting against the window. Rex lay curled at David's feet, his breathing slow and steady, a comforting presence. David, however, remained vigilant, his mind reeling. He was an airport K-9 officer, not a federal agent engaged in a covert operation against a global syndicate. Yet here he was, on the run, with a witness and a micro SD card that held the key to an empire. His life and Eleanor's, and even Rex's, had irrevocably changed the moment that vintage suitcase had been opened. He thought about Julian Thorne, the philanthropist, the art collector, the man at the top of this criminal empire. The name still bothered him. Julian Thorne? Agent Thorne? Was it truly just a coincidence, or was there another layer of deception at play? He pushed the thought away. It was too paranoid. Too much like the plots of the spy novels he occasionally read. But the seed of doubt, once planted, was hard to fully uproot. As dusk began to settle, casting long, purple shadows across the landscape, David realized they were nearing Willow Creek. The small town was nestled deep in the Catskills, a sleepy, unremarkable place that offered the perfect cover. Eleanor stirred, waking with a start. "We're close," she mumbled, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "The cabin is off the main road, on an old logging trail. It's unmarked, overgrown." Following her directions, David turned off the highway onto a narrow, unpaved road. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing in on either side. The silence here was profound, broken only by the crunch of their tires on gravel and the occasional call of a nocturnal bird. Finally, Eleanor pointed to a barely visible track leading off into the woods. "There, that's the trail. It's too narrow for a regular car. We'll have to walk the rest of the way." David parked the car, tucking it as far off the main track as possible, hoping it would go unnoticed. He retrieved his small bag, the one containing the micro SD card and his hastily acquired disguise. Rex stretched, shaking off his sleep, his senses immediately on high alert in the wilderness. As they began their trek along the dark, winding logging trail, the solitude of the forest felt both comforting and unnerving. They were hidden, for now. But David knew that Silas wouldn't stop. He was a shadow from the syndicate, an unyielding hunter. The brief respite was over. The true race against time, the race to expose Thorne before Silas could silence them, was about to begin. The missing piece, the micro SD card, was now in their hands. But keeping it safe and utilizing it to bring justice would be the greatest challenge of their lives. The air in the deep woods of upstate New York was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the airport. David, Eleanor, and Rex moved cautiously through the winding logging trail, the encroaching dusk deepening the shadows around them. The silence of the forest, once comforting, now felt heavy with the possibility of unseen threats. "Are you sure about this trail, Eleanor?" David whispered, his voice hushed. "It's barely visible." "My father designed it that way," she replied, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "He was meticulous about secrecy. He used this cabin as a private workshop, away from prying eyes. It's been years since I was here, but I remember it." Rex, ever alert, kept his nose to the ground, occasionally glancing back at them as if urging them to hurry. The short, sharp barks that had started this entire ordeal now felt like a distant echo, replaced by the chilling, silent pursuit of Silas after what felt like an eternity. The trees began to thin, revealing a small, dilapidated cabin nestled deep within a clearing. It was rustic, almost swallowed by the surrounding foliage, its windows dark and empty. It looked abandoned, a perfect camouflage. "This is it," Eleanor breathed, a flicker of something akin to relief, mixed with lingering apprehension, crossing her face. David approached cautiously, his hand on Rex's harness. He checked the perimeter, his police training kicking in. No obvious signs of forced entry, no fresh tracks other than their own. The cabin seemed untouched, Using a hidden key, Eleanor retrieved from beneath a loose stone near the porch. David unlatched the heavy wooden door. A stale, musty odor greeted them, the scent of disuse and forgotten time. David stepped inside first, Rex at his heels, his powerful body moving silently through the gloom. Eleanor followed, her eyes scanning the familiar, yet strangely alien. Space. The cabin was small, consisting of a single main room dominated by a large, sturdy workbench covered in an assortment of antique tools, precision instruments, and intricate clockwork components. This was where Eleanor's father, a genius coerced into darkness, had crafted the syndicate's bespoke deceptions. "We need light," David murmured, fumbling for his phone. Its flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. He found a switch, and with a hesitant flick, a single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered to life. Casting a harsh, yellow glow, Eleanor walked slowly around the room, her fingers trailing over the workbench, touching the tools her father had used. A profound sadness settled over her. "He loved this place," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "He loved his work. They took it all from him." David watched her, a newfound empathy stirring within him. He had seen her as a suspect, then as a terrified victim. Now, he saw her as a woman burdened by a terrible legacy, forced to carry the weight of her father's unwilling complicity. "Eleanor," David began, his voice gentle, "we're safe for now, but we need to understand everything. You said you were forced into this, that they threatened your family. Tell me." Eleanor hesitated, her gaze fixed on a small, framed photograph on the workbench, a faded image of a younger, smiling man, presumably her father, holding a tiny Eleanor. The memory seemed to give her strength. She took a deep breath. The confession, the long-held secret, finally ready to spill. "My father, Alistair Vance, was a master horologist," she began, her voice gaining a quiet steadiness. "He could build anything, repair anything, make any mechanism sing. He was renowned for his precision, his artistic touch. About 20 years ago, Julian Thorne approached him, not as a crime lord, but as a wealthy art collector, a patron who admired my father's unique skills." She paused, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Thorne lured him in, commissioned a few pieces. Then, he revealed his true nature. He wanted my father to create mechanisms for his acquisitions. Mechanisms like the one in that suitcase, hidden compartments, untraceable devices. My father refused. He was a good man. He believed in beauty, not deceit." "What happened then?" David prompted, listening intently. "They took my mother," Eleanor whispered, her eyes filling with tears again. "They didn't hurt her, not physically, but they took her to a remote location, isolated her, told my father that if he didn't comply, if he ever spoke a word, if he ever tried to escape, my mother would simply disappear forever." The image of such cold, calculated cruelty sent a shiver down David's spine. It wasn't brute force, it was psychological torture, a subtle, insidious form of control. "My father had no choice," Eleanor continued, her voice trembling. "He designed their elaborate decoys. He perfected the art of hiding things in plain sight. Every piece of stolen art, every illicit document, every piece of evidence they wanted to move undetected passed through his hands, concealed within his ingenious mechanisms. He was a prisoner in his own genius. And you," David asked softly, "you became part of it. When my father fell ill, About 5 years ago, Thorne suggested I take over. They knew I had learned from him, that I understood his designs. They threatened my mother again. I had no choice. I became their courier, their art handler. I transported the devices, knowing what they contained, knowing the evil they represented, but utterly powerless to stop it. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of deep weariness. Every flight I took, every suitcase I carried, it felt like a piece of my soul died. But you fought back, David stated, looking at the micro SD card still tucked safely in his pocket. You gathered the evidence. Eleanor looked up, her eyes blazing with a newfound resolve. My father left me clues, hidden notes in old blueprints, subtle alterations in the mechanisms. He wanted me to expose them. He couldn't, but he'd left me a path. I learned to decrypt their communication, to access their internal logs. It took years. Every piece of information, every name, every transaction, every location. I painstakingly recorded it. This cabin was my safe haven, my secret workspace. This workbench, it became my weapon. She gestured to a small, heavy safe, built into the stone fireplace, its surface scarred with age. That's where I kept my father's original blueprints. And that's where I would have uploaded the data tonight. If I had made it to San Lorenzo, Rex, who had been sitting patiently by David's side, let out a soft whine and nudged Eleanor's hand with his nose. Eleanor, startled, looked down at him. For a moment, she seemed to forget her fear, stroking his head gently. You're a good boy, aren't you? You knew. You knew I was carrying a burden. David watched the interaction, a profound realization dawning on him. Rex's earlier frantic barking wasn't just about the presence of the micro SD card or the mechanism. It was about Eleanor. Rex had sensed her deep emotional distress, her silent plea for help, her decades of living under duress. He had picked up on the residual scent of fear, of hidden truths, of suppressed pain clinging to her and the suitcase. Not just the physical contents. His loyalty wasn't just to protocol. It was to justice and to the innocent caught in the crossfire. This changes everything. Eleanor, David said, his voice quiet, you're not just a witness. You're a key player. You have invaluable insight into their operations, their methods, their weaknesses. Eleanor nodded, a fragile strength returning to her eyes. I know, and I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. I want to see Thorne brought down. For my father, for my mother, for everyone they've hurt. Then we'll do it, David affirmed, his hand going to his pocket, touching the micro SD card. Together. He knew the dangers were immense, that Silas was likely still hunting them, but with Eleanor's knowledge and Rex's unerring instinct, they now had a fighting chance. The cabin, a relic of a past built on forced ingenuity, was now their fortress, and the micro SD card, a testament to silent suffering, was their most potent weapon against the forces of injustice. The journey ahead would be perilous, but for the first time in years, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. The revelation of Eleanor's story had cast a new, urgent light on their desperate situation. David felt a profound shift in his understanding, not just of Eleanor, but of the very nature of the threat they faced. This wasn't just about stolen art. It was about human lives, coercion, and the systematic abuse of power. The micro SD card, now in David's possession, was no longer just evidence. It was the key to Eleanor's freedom and her family's justice. In the quiet solitude of the cabin, the only sounds were their soft breaths and Rex's steady presence. David pulled out the micro SD card from his pocket, holding the minuscule chip between his fingers. So, this card, it contains everything he asked Eleanor. His voice hushed with awe. Eleanor nodded, her eyes fixed on the tiny chip. Everything. Years of meticulous data collection. My father started it, leaving me breadcrumbs. I continued, piece by agonizing piece. Their financial records, shell corporations in Panama, the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, the names of their front companies, their corrupt contacts in customs and shipping, every step of their money laundering operations. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of her revelations. And their acquisitions, every piece of art, every antiquity, every historical document they've stolen since my father began working for them, cross-referenced with the dates and locations of their collections. It's a complete ledger of their crimes. David's mind reeled. This wasn't just a list. It was a comprehensive dossier, a roadmap to dismantling a criminal empire, and the locations of the stolen items, including the Ethelred Emerald. Yes, Eleanor confirmed. It includes the coordinates of their main vault. It's a fortress, built into a private estate in the Swiss Alps, owned by Julian Thorne. It's disguised as a personal art gallery, but it's a high-security bunker. The card has schematics, access codes, everything needed to get in, but also to bring it down. It also details their security network, their escape routes, their entire contingency plan should they ever be compromised. Rex, sensing the intensity of the moment, nudged David's hand with his nose, then let out a soft whine. His gaze shifting between David and the micro SD card. David instinctively understood. Rex hadn't just sensed the presence of the card, he had sensed its significance. He was a K9, yes, trained to sniff out specific illicit substances, but his true gift lay in perceiving anomalies, in detecting the unusual, the hidden, the profoundly important, even if it wasn't a familiar scent. He's never done this before, David murmured, stroking Rex's head. Alerted so strongly, so relentlessly, on something so abstract. You didn't carry anything else. Anything with a scent he'd recognize. Eleanor shook her head. No. Nothing. Just my clothes. The decoy mechanism. And this... She gestured to the card. He barked at the suitcase. Then at that specific corner. It was uncanny. It was as if he knew what was truly hidden. Even before you found the false bottom, David suddenly understood a crucial piece of the puzzle. Rex hadn't been targeting a specific chemical compound on the micro SD card itself. He'd been alerting on the story within the suitcase. The aging leather of the vintage case, infused over time with the faint, almost imperceptible scent of ancient materials, the rare pigments from the stolen paintings, the unique dust from centuries-old manuscripts, the subtle, lingering essence of the Ethelred Emerald itself, perhaps even residue from the vault where it had been stored. These were scents David couldn't detect, but Rex's superior olfactory senses could. It was an abstract, complex olfactory signature of crime and history, a scent of the syndicate's illicit dealings, and intertwined with those faint historical scents was Eleanor's pervasive, overwhelming fear, a scent David could perceive. Rex had picked up on the combination, the unusual scent of the past, coupled with the intense human distress, triggering his most profound alert. He wasn't just a drug dog, he was a truth detector. His barks were a cry against injustice, a warning of danger, a desperate communication of a hidden, shocking truth. He smelled the history, David said, a profound realization settling over him. He smelled the crimes, the age of the artifacts, the materials. He smelled your fear. Eleanor. He was alerting to all of it, not just contraband, but the essence of the syndicate's dark existence. Eleanor looked at Rex, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. He truly is remarkable. He saved my life, and he's helping us bring down Thorn. We need to get this uploaded, David stated, his voice firm. Do you have the equipment here? A secure connection. Eleanor gestured to the workbench. My father had a custom-built, encrypted workstation here, completely off the grid, insulated from external networks. He used it to work on sensitive projects without fear of detection. It's old, but it's completely secure. I just need to power it up. She moved to the workbench, her fingers flying over familiar components, connecting cables, adjusting settings. David watched, impressed by her technical proficiency. This was not just a woman who had been coerced. She was a woman of immense intelligence and resilience, a true adversary to the syndicate she had been forced to serve. As the workstation whirred to life, a small green light blinking on its ancient monitor. Eleanor turned to David. The upload will take some time. The data is heavily encrypted, layered with my father's unique ciphers. It's designed to prevent anyone but me, or someone with his specific knowledge, from accessing it quickly. Good, David murmured. That gives us a buffer. But it also means Silas won't be able to just snatch the card and immediately understand what he has. He'll have to come for you. Eleanor nodded grimly. Exactly. And he will come. He'll find this place. Eventually. How long do you think we have? David asked, his gaze instinctively drifting to the cabin's reinforced windows. Eleanor bit her lip. A few hours, maybe. If he's as good as I know he is, and if he had any leads from the airport, he'll be systematically eliminating possibilities. He knows I would try to upload the data. He knows I was trying to escape. This cabin is a logical place for me to go. A known family secret. He won't assume I'm here immediately, but he'll work it out. David's mind raced. A few hours. That wasn't much time, but it was enough to get the upload started and to prepare for a confrontation. He had his service weapon, his training, and Rex, and now he had Eleanor's invaluable knowledge and her desperate resolve. While that's running, can you tell me more about Thorn's operations, anything that could help us prepare? David requested. Eleanor began to outline the syndicate's modus operandi, her words painting a chilling picture of their reach and ruthlessness. They didn't just steal, they destabilized. They manipulated markets, influenced political figures, and even orchestrated minor conflicts to create opportunities for their illicit acquisitions. Julian Thorn, the seemingly benevolent philanthropist, was a puppet master, pulling strings in the shadows. He's utterly obsessed with the Ethelred Emerald, Eleanor explained. It's not just about its value. It's a symbol of his power, his ability to take something priceless and make it disappear without a trace. He believes it makes him untouchable. David listened, absorbing every detail. The more he learned, the more he understood the immense power they were up against, but also the more he understood the vulnerability of Julian Thorn. The emerald was his strength, but also his Achilles heel, exposing its whereabouts, proving his involvement, would shatter his carefully constructed facade and destroy his untouchable image. Rex, meanwhile, had settled down near the entrance, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes remained open, constantly scanning the darkness beyond the cabin windows. He was their watchful guardian, their silent sentry. his senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the forest. The distant snap of a twig, the faint scent carried on the wind. David knew that the moment the micro SD card finished uploading its devastating truth, the real war would begin. Silas would be at their doorstep, a grim reaper sent by a vengeful emperor. But they would be ready. They had the truth, and they had each other. The hidden truth, once locked away in a vintage suitcase, was about to be unleashed upon the world, and its impact would indeed shock everyone. The whirring of the old computer on the workbench filled the cabin, a low, steady hum that became the soundtrack to their vigil. Eleanor, her face illuminated by the green glow of the monitor, meticulously oversaw the data transfer from the micro SD card. David, meanwhile, moved through the small cabin, securing windows, checking the sturdy locks on the door, and making mental notes of potential defensive positions. Rex, ever vigilant, remained by the front door, a silent sentinel, his powerful form a testament to his unwavering loyalty. "It's slow," Eleanor murmured, her voice tight with anticipation. "The encryption layers are incredibly complex. My father built them to withstand anything short of a direct military cyber attack." "Good," David replied, checking the latch on a small, reinforced window. "Every minute it takes is a minute Thorne and Silas don't fully understand what we have. It's a race, but for now, we're ahead." He looked at Rex, who hadn't moved from his post. The German shepherd's ears were constantly swiveling, his nose twitching, taking in every subtle shift in the night air. David found immense comfort in Rex's presence, not just for his protection, but for the profound, almost spiritual connection they shared. "It's still incredible," David mused, kneeling beside Rex, stroking his thick fur. "How you knew? Boy, how you saw through all that deception. You didn't just smell something illegal. Did you? You smelled the truth." Eleanor turned from the computer, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know, when my father was alive, he always said his most difficult projects weren't the ones with the most intricate mechanisms, but the ones that had to hold the most weight. He meant the emotional weight, the historical weight of the items they were forced to conceal." David nodded. "The Ethelred Emerald, decades of stolen art, the truth about a global syndicate." "Precisely," Eleanor continued. "And my father was meticulous. He didn't just design the mechanisms. He often handled the transfer of the stolen artifacts into their hidden compartments. He would always complain about the dust, the microscopic particles, the faint residue that clung to these ancient objects, things that wouldn't show up on a normal forensic scan, but things he, with his artisan's sensitivity, could almost feel: rare pigments, aged paper, unique minerals, traces of their original environments, their long histories." A jolt went through David. The rare pigment. He remembered the forensic team finding traces of it on the false bottom of the suitcase, a pigment identical to that found at the Ethelred Emerald heist site. He had dismissed it as a confirmation that the mechanism was connected. But what if Rex had smelled something even more profound? "Rex," David said softly, looking into the dog's intelligent eyes, "did you smell the history in that suitcase? Boy, the age of the emerald, the old paintings. Did you smell the fear Eleanor was carrying? Not just the typical scents we train for." Rex whined softly, then nudged David's hand with his wet nose, as if confirming David's thought. It was a communication beyond words, a silent affirmation of his extraordinary capabilities. Eleanor approached them, a look of revelation on her face. "It makes sense. My father always said animals could perceive things humans couldn't. He used to have an old cat here in the cabin, and it would always react strangely to the pieces my father was working on for Thorn, even when they were completely sealed. It was as if it sensed the wrongness, the dark energy clinging to them. Canines are trained for specific scent profiles, narcotics, explosives, David explained. But Rex has always been different, more intuitive. There was that one time, a couple of years ago, he alerted on an empty box. We were stumped, turns out. It had been used to transport a rare, smuggled endangered animal. Long after the animal was gone, Rex smelled the residual pheromones, the fear of the animal, even the unique scent of its rare habitat. We dismissed it as an anomaly, a fluke. Eleanor's eyes widened. It wasn't a fluke. It was Rex's foresight. He doesn't just detect what is there. He detects what was there. And perhaps even the emotional resonance left behind. The anxiety of Ms. Vance. The ancient dust of the emerald. The fear of the animal. They are all interconnected by a profound sense of wrongness. A disturbance in the normal order of things. He smells the story contained within the object, not just its chemical composition. The realization settled over David like a warm blanket of certainty. It wasn't just exceptional training. It was Rex's unique gift. He could perceive the faint echoes of past events, the emotional imprints, the complex interplay of sense that told a tale beyond human comprehension. His barking at the suitcase wasn't just a signal for contraband. It was a desperate attempt to communicate the entire, sprawling narrative of betrayal, injustice, and hidden truth. He had literally smelled the history of the Ethel Red Emerald, the fear of Eleanor, and the sinister presence of the Syndicate, all contained within that innocuous-looking vintage suitcase. This profound understanding deepened David's bond with Rex even further. He wasn't just a partner. He was a living, breathing marvel, a guardian angel with an uncanny sense for the hidden injustices of the world. He's been trying to tell us the whole story all along, hasn't he? Boy, David murmured, scratching Rex behind the ears. Rex responded with a low rumble of contentment, leaning into David's touch. "What's the status on the upload, Eleanor?" David asked, his voice now imbued with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a personal crusade, fueled by Rex's incredible insight and Eleanor's harrowing confession. Eleanor turned back to the workstation. Just past the halfway mark. Another hour, maybe an hour and a half. If there are no more decryption hang-ups, the main directory is visible now. It's truly comprehensive. Thorn's entire empire, laid bare. David looked at the monitor, seeing the rows of files, the complex directory structure that represented the Syndicate's illicit activities. It was overwhelming, a digital fortress of crime. But soon, it would be unlocked, exposed for the world to see. While that's running, we need to prepare for Silas, David stated, his tone shifting to a more tactical one. This cabin isn't a fort. We need to plan our defense, and our escape route if it comes to that. Eleanor nodded, her fear momentarily overshadowed by a growing sense of empowerment. There are a few places. My father designed this cabin with contingencies. There's a small cellar, and a tunnel that leads to a hidden exit down by the creek. It was his escape route, should Thorn ever come for him. "Show me," David commanded, his mind already formulating a defensive strategy. Rex, sensing the shift in their demeanor, rose to his feet, his posture once again alert and ready. Eleanor led David to a section of the wooden floor near the fireplace, with a practiced hand. She lifted a cleverly disguised trapdoor, revealing a narrow, dark opening leading into a small, earthy cellar. It's cramped, but it's reinforced, she explained. And the tunnel starts from here. David peered into the darkness, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The tunnel looked rough-hewn but sturdy, clearly the work of someone who understood the need for discreet escape. Good, he said, his voice grim. We'll use it if we have to. But first, we hold our ground. We have the evidence now, Eleanor. We're not running anymore. We're fighting back. A grim determination settled over Eleanor's face. The passive victim was gone, replaced by a woman ready to confront her tormentors. With the truth laid bare and Rex's incredible foresight guiding them, they were no longer just two people on the run. They were an unlikely alliance, armed with the evidence that could shatter an empire, and a loyal canine who could smell the very essence of justice. The night was young, and Silas was coming, but for the first time, David felt a flicker of hope, a tangible belief that they could win. The clock on the cabin wall, an old ticking relic from Eleanor's father's workshop, seemed to mock their dwindling time. Outside, the night deepened, transforming the dense forest into a canvas of impenetrable shadows. The workstation's faint glow cast a stark light on Eleanor's focused face as the upload continued its agonizingly slow progress. David, meanwhile, moved with grim purpose, methodically checking and reinforcing every potential entry point. How much longer? Eleanor, David asked, tightening a screw on a makeshift barricade he'd fashioned across the main door using a sturdy piece of timber. Rex, ever at his side, watched his movements with intense, intelligent eyes. 45 minutes, maybe an hour, Eleanor replied, not taking her eyes off the monitor. It's hitting the final encryption layers now. These are my father's most complex ciphers. Good, David muttered. More time for Silas to waste trying to get in. He knew it was a false sense of security. Silas wouldn't just waste time. He'd be meticulously planning his approach, analyzing the cabin, assessing their defenses. David moved to the windows, covering them with thick blankets to block out any light, turning the cabin into a dark, impenetrable shell. He then began to strategically place objects around the room that could serve as makeshift weapons or tripwires, a heavy iron poker by the fireplace, a stack of sturdy wooden crates near the windows, anything to slow down an intruder. He was an airport K-9 officer, not a SWAT operative, but years of training in self-defense and tactical awareness kicked in. Eleanor, David said, his voice low, while that's running, tell me about Silas, his methods, his weaknesses, if he has any. Eleanor turned, her eyes distant, as if recalling a nightmare. Silas? He's almost machine-like, former military, as I said. He thrives in chaos. In the dark, he's proficient with knives, silent takedowns. Firearms are a last resort for him. He prefers to be unseen, unheard. He's meticulous. He'll cut the power first, try to disorient us. Then he'll move fast, aiming to neutralize us before we even know he's there. A shiver ran down David's spine. Weaknesses. He's arrogant, Eleanor said, a flicker of something almost like contempt in her eyes. He believes he's untouchable, infallible. He relies on surprise and his superior training. He doesn't like unexpected variables. He gets frustrated when things don't go according to his plan, and he has a particular disdain for animals. He considers them unpredictable and a nuisance. David looked at Rex, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Good to know. Rex, sensing the shift in conversation, lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He understood. We need a plan. David continued, his voice firm, taking command. If he cuts the power, we move to the cellar. It's the most defensible position, and the tunnel is our last resort. Rex will be our eyes and ears. He'll detect Silas before we do. Eleanor nodded, her fear morphing into a grim determination. I can set up a few booby traps. Nothing lethal, but enough to create noise. Give us a warning. My father had a few tricks up his sleeve, too. Together. They moved through the cabin, their movements coordinated, a nascent trust forming between them. Eleanor, using her father's old tools, rigged small, almost invisible tripwires with fishing line and suspended cans, designed to clatter loudly if disturbed. David positioned the heavy furniture to create choke points, funneling any intruder into specific, narrow pathways. As they worked, David's phone, which he had kept on silent vibrate, buzzed. It was Director Hayes, David answered, keeping his voice low. Miller here. Officer Miller, the task force is mobilizing. Hayes's voice was urgent, strained. But we have a problem. We've lost contact with Agent Thorne at JFK. His last communication was about your unauthorized departure, and there's a report of an unregistered black sedan, matching a description we received, leaving the airport at high speed, heading north. We believe Silas is already active. What's your status? David's blood ran cold. Thorne. The strange coincidence of the names. The way Thorne had initially dismissed Rex's alert. The subtle delay tactics. The seed of doubt, planted earlier, now blossomed into a terrifying certainty. Director, I have reason to believe Agent Thorne might be compromised, David said, his voice tight. His name. It's the same as Julian Thorne, the syndicate leader Eleanor just identified. A stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Hayes's voice, sharp and disbelieving. Miller, that's a serious accusation. Agent Thorne has a clean record. Years of service. I know, sir, but the coincidence is too strong. And his behavior at the airport. There were subtle signs. He tried to dismiss Rex's alert. He was hesitant to open the suitcase. He seemed too willing to believe it was a false alarm. He might have been relaying information, and Silas knew where to find us, almost immediately. Good God! Hayes breathed. If what you're saying is true, the depth of this conspiracy is unfathomable. We'll initiate an immediate internal investigation on Thorne. But right now, your priority is to secure that data and stay alive. Do you have a location for that vault in Switzerland? Yes, Director, David confirmed, glancing at Eleanor, who was now listening intently. It's part of the data being uploaded right now. We'll transmit it to you as soon as it's complete, but expect company soon. Silas is on our tail. We'll do everything we can to get you support, Miller. Hayes promised, his voice grim. Stay safe, and for God's sake, keep that dog safe. David hung up, his eyes meeting Eleanor's. Agent Thorne, he's compromised. He's working for Julian Thorne. He might have been the one who alerted Silas. Eleanor gasped, her face pale. I should have known. It makes sense. His access, his position. Thorne always had someone on the inside, someone high up. The betrayal, she realized, went deeper than she had ever imagined. The new revelation added another layer of urgency to their situation. Their pursuer was not just a skilled operative. He was likely being fed real-time intelligence by an inside man, someone they had implicitly trusted. They were effectively blind, fighting an enemy who could see their every move. Suddenly, Rex stiffened, his low growl, previously almost imperceptible, deepened. becoming a warning rumble. His hackles rose and his ears swiveled, pinpointing a sound David couldn't yet hear. "He's here," David whispered, his hand going to his sidearm. Eleanor's head snapped towards the front of the cabin, her eyes wide with terror. A faint sound, like a branch snapping underfoot, echoed from the dense woods outside. Then, silence. A heavy, pregnant silence. Silas wasn't going to announce his arrival. "Cellar," David commanded, his voice sharp. "Now, bring the laptop." Eleanor, her hands trembling, quickly unplugged the workstation. Clutching the laptop with the micro SD card still inside, Rex, with a single, urgent bark, ushered them towards the trapdoor. They scrambled down into the cramped, earthen cellar, the laptop screen the only source of light. David pulled the trapdoor shut, plunging the cabin above into darkness. The air in the cellar was cool and damp, smelling of earth through the thin wooden floorboards. They could hear it now, a soft, almost imperceptible thud from above. Then the faint squeak of a floorboard. Silas was inside. He had breached the cabin. Rex pressed close to David, let out a deep, ferocious growl, directed at the ceiling. His teeth were bared, a silent promise of resistance. David aimed his pistol at the trapdoor. "Stay ready, Eleanor. If he comes down here, you get to the tunnel, no matter what." Eleanor nodded, her face grim. She cradled the laptop, its screen still displaying the slow progress bar of the upload. This tiny, glowing rectangle was their only hope, the key to bringing down Julian Thorne's empire. The race against time was no longer theoretical. It was a brutal, terrifying reality, playing out in the dark confines of a remote cabin, with a ruthless operative above them, and the fate of countless lives resting on a single, glowing progress bar. Rex's foresight, his uncanny ability to perceive the deeper truths, had brought them to this perilous precipice. Now, their survival depended on it. The silence from above was more terrifying than any sound. David, Eleanor, and Rex crouched in the musty darkness of the cellar, the only light emanating from the laptop screen where the upload crawled agonizingly towards completion. The faint creaks and shifting sounds from the floorboards above told them that Silas was there, a silent predator moving through the cabin. Rex, pressed close to David, remained a taut coil of muscle, his low growl a constant, guttural warning directed at the trapdoor above. His eyes, glowing faintly in the laptop's light, were fixed on the wooden planks, his ears twitching with every subtle vibration. "He's not being subtle anymore," David whispered, his voice barely audible. He could hear the distinct, methodical sounds of someone searching, overturning furniture, ripping through fabric. Silas wasn't just observing. He was actively hunting, desperate to find them and the micro SD card. Eleanor clutched the laptop to her chest, her knuckles white. "He's looking for the card. He knows it contains everything. He'll tear this cabin apart until he finds it." A sudden, sharp crash echoed from above, followed by the splintering of wood. Silas was getting impatient, resorting to brute force. "We can't stay here," David stated, his eyes darting around the small cellar. "He'll find this trapdoor. It's too obvious." He looked at Eleanor. "The tunnel. Where does it lead?" Eleanor pointed to a dark, narrow opening in the earthen wall at the far end of the cellar. "It opens out into a thicket down by the creek, about 100 yards from here. It's well concealed. But it's narrow, and it's a tight squeeze. No choice," David said grimly. "When the upload is complete, we go. But we need a diversion, something to buy us time." He scanned the cellar, his gaze falling on an old, rusty oil lamp. An idea sparked. Eleanor, can you hear anything about the security systems of Julian Thorne's estate on that data? Anything that could be used against him directly? Eleanor quickly navigated through the glowing directories on the laptop. Yes, here. Under contingencies, master assets. It details his personal security network, how to bypass it, and a series of timed charges for self-destructing data, but also to collapse sections of the vault if it's compromised. Perfect, David muttered, a plan forming in his mind. We'll send a fragment of that data, a small, tantalizing piece, something that proves we have the full access codes and implies we're about to expose everything. It'll throw Thorne into a panic, give us leverage, and buy us time. He'll know it's a threat. Eleanor warned, he'll send more than just Silas. That's the point, David countered. We need to escalate the stakes, make him realize we're serious, and it might make Silas hesitate, or at least force him to change his tactics. Suddenly, the floorboards above them groaned loudly. A section of the ceiling directly above the trapdoor splintered, and a sliver of moonlight pierced the darkness. Silas was directly overhead, undoubtedly searching for the mechanism to open the trapdoor. Rex let out a ferocious bark, lunging at the cellar ceiling. His teeth snapped at the splintering wood, a terrifying display of protective fury. He's found it, Eleanor gasped, her face pale. Not yet, David whispered, his hand resting on Rex's back, calming him. He's just feeling around. We need to be ready. The upload progress bar edged forward, agonizingly slow. 90%, 91%. Can you prepare that data fragment? Eleanor, David urged. The access codes to Thorne's personal security network, just enough to show him we're inside his system. Eleanor's fingers flew across the keyboard, a flurry of motion as she isolated the relevant data. She was no longer just the terrified victim. She was a woman fighting for her life and for the justice her family deserved. Their alliance, forged in desperation, was solidifying into a powerful force. A faint clunk echoed from above. Silas was clearly trying to force the trap door open. David braced himself, his pistol raised. 95%, 96%. Almost there, Eleanor whispered, her voice strained. Another crack from above, louder this time. The trapdoor groaned under the pressure. Now, Eleanor, David commanded. Done, Eleanor exclaimed, hitting the final key. Data sent. It's a coded message, delivered to his most secure personal server. He'll get it within minutes. The laptop screen flashed a confirmation message. The transfer was complete. All right. Rex, lead the way, David ordered, pushing open the hidden tunnel entrance. Eleanor, you first. Take the laptop. I'll cover the rear. Eleanor, clutching the laptop, squeezed into the narrow, dark tunnel, crawling forward. Rex, surprisingly agile, followed close behind her, his powerful body wriggling through the confined space. David backed into the tunnel, pulling the makeshift door shut behind him, plunging the cellar into complete darkness. Moments later, they heard it a triumphant crack as the trapdoor above them finally gave way. A faint sliver of moonlight streamed into the cellar. They heard Silas drop into the cellar with a soft thud, his movements swift and silent. He's in, David whispered to Eleanor, who was now a few feet ahead in the tunnel. They heard Silas moving in the cellar, his breathing surprisingly calm. He would realize the cabin was empty. Then he would immediately look for the tunnel. Move faster, David urged, pushing forward. The tunnel was tight, dark, and filled with roots and damp earth. They crawled on hands and knees, the air thick with the scent of soil and moss. Rex, ahead of them, was moving with remarkable speed, his instincts guiding him through the subterranean darkness. Suddenly, a faint tremor ran through the tunnel. Silas was above them, on the surface, moving towards the direction of the creek, anticipating their exit. He was guessing their escape route, trying to cut them off. "He knows where the tunnel leads," Eleanor gasped, her voice tight with fear. "My father's contingencies. He probably found a map, or figured it out." "He's good," David admitted grimly, "but we have a head start." They crawled for what felt like an eternity, the air growing colder, signaling their proximity to the creek. Finally, Rex stopped. They heard a faint gurgling sound. The creek. "We're here," Eleanor whispered. David pushed through the final few feet of the tunnel, emerging into a dense thicket of bushes, directly on the bank of a narrow, swiftly flowing creek. The moonlight dappled through the trees, illuminating the water. "Stay low," David instructed, pulling Eleanor and Rex deeper into the bushes. They heard it then, the faint crunch of footsteps from the direction of the cabin, moving rapidly through the undergrowth. Silas was closing in. David peered through the leaves. He saw a shadowy figure moving silently along the opposite bank of the creek, a dark silhouette against the moonlight. Silas. He had indeed predicted their escape route. Silas stopped, scanning the creek, his head cocked, listening. He was close enough now that David could almost feel his chilling presence. David's gaze fell on a stack of old, waterlogged logs near the creek bank. An idea, reckless but potentially effective, formed in his mind. "Eleanor," David whispered, "can you swim?" "Yes, but the current is strong," she replied, her voice strained. "Rex, can you create a diversion?" David asked the dog, speaking in a low, specific tone. Tapping the logs. Rex looked at the logs, then at the shadowy figure across the creek, and understood. He let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on Silas. David then looked at the logs, then back at Silas. "We create a noise here. He'll expect us to cross the creek. We'll swim downstream, under cover of the bank. We need to lose him in the water." Eleanor nodded, her face grim. They were two unlikely allies, a canine officer and a coerced artisan, forced to trust each other completely in a desperate race against a ruthless enemy. The treacherous journey through the woods, the tense standoff in the cabin, and now the perilous escape through the cold creek. Each step solidified their fragile alliance, their shared determination to bring justice to Julian Thorne and escape Silas's deadly pursuit. Their perilous journey was far from over, but with the data uploaded and a plan in motion, they had a fighting chance. The cold, clear water of the creek bit at their skin as David, Eleanor, and Rex plunged into its depths. The current was swift, tugging at their clothes, but David gripped Eleanor's hand firmly, pulling her along. Rex, surprisingly nimble in the water, swam powerfully beside them, his eyes still fixed on the bank they had just left. "Stay low. Keep to the shadows," David whispered, his voice muffled by the gurgling water. He knew Silas would be expecting them to emerge directly across from the tunnel's exit. Their best chance was to use the creek itself as cover, letting the current carry them downstream while staying hidden beneath the overhanging branches and dense foliage along the banks. A moment later, they heard a splash from where they had entered the water. Silas. He had followed them. David risked a quick glance back. A dark figure stood silhouetted against the dim moonlight on the bank, a glint of metal in his hand. Silas was armed, and he wasn't afraid to use it. "He's got a rifle," David muttered, pulling Eleanor further under a low-hanging willow branch. "We need to put some distance between us." They swam with desperate urgency, the frigid water sapping their strength but sharpening their resolve. Eleanor, despite her exhaustion, pushed through the current, clutching the laptop to her chest, protecting the precious data. Rex, acting as a silent scout, occasionally surfaced to gauge their position, then slipped back under the protective canopy of the bank after what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes. The creek widened slightly, and the banks grew steeper and more forested. David saw a small, rocky inlet ahead, a perfect spot to emerge unnoticed. "There," he hissed, pointing. "We'll get out there." They struggled against the current, pulling themselves onto the muddy bank, breathless and shivering. Rex shook himself vigorously, spraying water everywhere, then immediately scanned their surroundings. "Which way now?" Eleanor gasped, shivering uncontrollably. "We need to get back to the main road, but away from this area," David said, his mind racing. "Silas will assume we're still close to the creek. We need to cut through the woods, away from the water." They plunged back into the dense forest, their wet clothes clinging to them, making every step heavy. The terrain was uneven, littered with fallen leaves and unseen roots. The sounds of the forest pressed in on them, the rustling of unseen creatures, the hoot of an owl, every snap of a twig sounding like Silas's approach. Suddenly, Rex froze, his ears swiveled, his body tensing, and a low, resonant growl vibrated in his chest. He was staring intensely into the darkness ahead. "What is it, boy?" David whispered, pulling his pistol. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not Silas, but two other men, burly and heavily armed, moving with practiced stealth. They were wearing dark, unmarked tactical gear. Silas had backup. He had anticipated their escape and had set up a perimeter. "Run the other way," David commanded, pushing Eleanor back. They turned and fled, crashing through the undergrowth. But the woods seemed to be closing in around them. They heard more rustling, more footsteps. Silas had them surrounded. They stumbled into a small, natural clearing. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, fanning out, trapping them. Silas stood in the center, a cruel smile playing on his lips, a suppressed rifle in his hand. The other 2 men flanked him, their weapons raised. "Well, well, Officer Miller," Silas purred, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "And the little bird, I must admit, you're more resourceful than I gave you credit for. But the game ends here." Eleanor instinctively shrunk behind David. Clutching the laptop, Rex positioned himself in front of David, a living shield, his teeth bared, a guttural snarl rumbling in his throat. "Silas," David said, his voice firm, "it's over. The data has been uploaded. Julian Thorne's empire is exposed. You're too late." Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "A bluff. Officer, a desperate bluff. Thorne just confirmed the initial data fragment arrived. It was tantalizing, yes, but the full upload? Unlikely. My employer is not easily rattled. And even if it were true, what good is data without the source, without the one who can explain it? Verify it." His eyes narrowed, fixing on Eleanor. "You're still the key. Little bird, and that card will be mine." He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Eleanor. "No," David yelled, lunging forward, pushing Eleanor behind him. Rex, with a ferocious bark, sprang at Silas, a blur of fur and teeth. The sudden, unexpected attack caught Silas off guard. He stumbled back, firing wildly. One of his shots went wide. Another grazed Rex's shoulder, eliciting a sharp yelp of pain from the dog. But Rex's attack bought them precious seconds. David returned fire, hitting one of Silas's henchmen in the leg. The man cried out, dropping his weapon. The other henchman, startled, hesitated. "Eleanor, run!" David shouted, providing cover fire, forcing Silas and his remaining man to take cover behind trees. Eleanor, her face streaked with tears, hesitated, looking at Rex, who was limping but still snarling at Silas. "Go, he's hurt. But he'll be fine. Save the data," David urged, pushing her towards the far side of the clearing. Eleanor, with a heart-wrenching sob, turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness, the laptop clutched tightly to her chest. Silas, realizing his primary target was escaping, roared with fury. "Get her! I'll deal with him and the dog." He signaled his remaining henchmen to pursue Eleanor, while he himself focused his chilling gaze on David and Rex. "It's just you and me now." "Officer," Silas hissed, stepping from behind the tree, his rifle aimed, "and your pathetic dog. A K-9 and a cop against the best the syndicate has. You don't stand a chance." David knew he was outmatched. Silas was a trained killer, armed with superior weaponry. But he had Rex, and he had a purpose. He had to buy Eleanor enough time. Rex, despite his injury, positioned himself defensively between David and Silas, a defiant protector. His low growl was a constant threat, his eyes never leaving Silas. The showdown in the moonlit clearing was tense, a silent ballet of predator and prey. David knew he couldn't win a direct shootout. He had to outsmart Silas, rely on the element of surprise, and on Rex's unique abilities. "You think you're untouchable, Silas?" David taunted, trying to provoke him, to draw his attention away from the subtle movements Rex was making. "You're just a glorified cleaner, a lapdog for a man like Julian Thorne. He'll sacrifice you the moment you become a liability." Silas's eyes flashed with anger. "You know nothing. Dog handler. I am the syndicate's right hand. I am their ultimate solution." He raised his rifle, aiming for a kill shot. But just as he fired, Rex moved with an astonishing burst of speed. Despite his injured leg, he launched himself at Silas's rifle arm, knocking the weapon upwards. The shot went harmlessly into the night sky. Silas snarled, dropping the rifle and pulling a combat knife. He was a terrifying blur. Moving with lightning speed, he lunged at Rex, intent on silencing the dog, but David was ready. As Silas moved, David threw himself forward, tackling Silas low, knocking him off balance. They tumbled to the ground. A desperate struggle in the dark. Silas, enraged, lashed out with his knife. David felt a searing pain as the blade grazed his arm. Rex, despite his injury, was relentless. He snapped at Silas's exposed leg, forcing him to momentarily abandon his attack on David. The fight was brutal, a desperate brawl in the dirt. David used every piece of his training, grappling with the larger, more skilled Silas. He blocked a knife thrust, then managed to land a solid punch to Silas's jaw. Silas staggered back, momentarily disoriented. It was all the opening David needed. "Rex, attack," David commanded, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. Rex, his eyes blazing, launched himself at Silas again, this time aiming for his knife hand. He clamped down, his powerful jaws locking onto Silas's wrist, forcing him to drop the blade with a yell of pain as Silas reeled back. David saw his opportunity. He lunged, disarming Silas of a secondary knife he had concealed. And then, with a desperate surge of strength, he tackled Silas again, slamming him against a thick tree trunk. He pressed his injured arm against Silas's throat, pinning him. "It's over, Silas," David panted, pressing harder. "You lose." Silas struggled, his eyes wild with a mixture of pain and disbelief. He, the untouchable enforcer, was being brought down by an airport K-9 officer and his injured dog. Just then, the sounds of approaching sirens pierced the night, growing louder and closer. Director Hayes had acted quickly, sending reinforcements. Silas heard the sirens too, and a flicker of pure rage crossed his face. He spat at David. "This isn't over. Thorne will find you. He will make you pay." David ignored him, holding him down until the first federal agents burst into the clearing, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Officer Miller, are you all right?" Director Hayes himself was among them, his face grim but relieved. "We have him, Director," David replied, his voice hoarse, gesturing to the pinned Silas. "And Eleanor Vance, with the full data, escaped into the woods. One of his men is after her." Hayes immediately dispatched a team to pursue the remaining henchmen and secure Eleanor. The clearing, once a silent battleground, now swarmed with federal agents. David looked at Rex, who was limping slightly but standing proudly beside him, his gaze fixed on the now restrained Silas. Rex had done it. His loyalty, his courage, his uncanny foresight had brought down the syndicate's most ruthless enforcer. The initial standoff at the airport, the desperate escape, and the brutal showdown in the woods had culminated in this moment. The tide had turned, and justice, for the first time, felt within their grasp. The clearing, once a scene of brutal combat, now hummed with the organized chaos of federal agents. Sirens wailed in the distance as more units converged on their location. David, his arm throbbing from Silas's knife, watched as the syndicate's enforcer was efficiently restrained and taken into custody. Silas, defeated but still defiant, glared at David and Rex, a promise of future vengeance in his cold eyes. "Officer Miller, you did well," Director Hayes said, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and relief. He clapped David on the shoulder, then turned his attention to Rex. "And this dog, he's a true hero. Get him to a vet immediately." A federal K-9 medic was already rushing towards Rex, carefully examining his grazed shoulder. Rex, despite the pain, remained stoic, his attention still fixed on Silas until the enforcer was finally led away, disappearing into the darkness. "Where's Eleanor?" David asked, his voice hoarse, his gaze sweeping the tree line. "And the laptop? My team is on it," Hayes assured him. "They're trained for tracking. She won't be far, and that data is our top priority." Minutes later, a shout echoed through the woods. "We found her, and the laptop is secure." David felt a profound wave of relief wash over him. Eleanor emerged from the trees, escorted by two armed agents, her face streaked with dirt and tears, but a look of fierce determination in her eyes. She still clutched the laptop protectively. "Eleanor!" David called out, a genuine smile breaking through his weariness. She rushed towards him, embracing him briefly, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. "The other one, Silas's man. He's been apprehended," an agent confirmed. "He ran right into our perimeter." Director Hayes stepped forward, his expression grave. "Ms. Vance, the data, is it truly comprehensive?" Eleanor nodded, handing him the laptop. "Every piece of it. Julian Thorne's entire empire, the Ethelred Emerald, its location, the syndicate's network, their financial records, their contacts, even the contingency plans for the vault. It's all there. Hayes looked at the laptop, then back at Eleanor, a profound understanding dawning in his eyes. This is it. This is what we've been chasing for decades. A ghost that no one believed existed. He turned to a nearby forensic expert. Get this laptop secured immediately. We need to mirror this data, analyze every byte. This is going to bring down a global enterprise. As Eleanor was led away to a waiting medical team for examination and protective custody, David felt a wave of exhaustion. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him sore, bruised, and bone-weary. But there was also a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice. It was within reach. The next few days were a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and an intense deep dive into the data Eleanor had provided. David's arm was stitched up, and Rex received expert veterinary care. His wound was superficial, but the emotional strain of the past few days had taken its toll on both of them. The information from the micro SD card was, as Eleanor had promised, utterly damning. Julian Thorne, the celebrated philanthropist, was exposed as the ruthless mastermind behind the syndicate. His vast network of legitimate businesses served as fronts for money laundering and illicit trade. The data revealed his intricate web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and corrupt officials in high places across the globe. The Ethelred Emerald, the legendary jewel, was indeed located in a hidden vault beneath Thorne's private estate in the Swiss Alps, disguised as an innocuous art gallery. The schematics on the card provided detailed blueprints of the vault's defenses, its hidden entrance, and even the combination to its multi-layered safe. The federal task force, now armed with irrefutable evidence, moved swiftly and decisively. Operations were launched simultaneously across multiple continents. Julian Thorne's private jet was intercepted mid-flight over international waters. He was apprehended, shocked and enraged, his carefully constructed facade shattering with his capture. The raid on his Swiss estate was a triumph. Using Eleanor's provided schematics, agents bypassed Thorne's formidable security, infiltrating the hidden vault. And there it was, gleaming in the sterile light of the vault. Surrounded by countless other stolen masterpieces, the Ethelred Emerald, returned to the world after decades of being a mere whisper. Along with it, priceless paintings, ancient artifacts, and historical documents, all recovered, their rightful owners finally able to reclaim what was lost. The news broke like a tsunami, engulfing headlines worldwide. The benevolent philanthropist Julian Thorne, exposed as the global crime lord, the story of the canine dog, Rex, whose inexplicable bark at an unassuming suitcase had unraveled decades of hidden crime, captured the public's imagination. David Miller, the quiet canine handler, became an overnight sensation, hailed as a national hero. Eleanor Vance, initially kept anonymous for her protection, eventually chose to come forward, testifying against Thorne and his remaining associates. Her courage, her years of secret defiance, and her role in meticulously collecting the damning evidence earned her full immunity and a fresh start under a new identity. She chose a quiet life, far from the shadows of the syndicate, finally free to live on her own terms. The internal investigation into Agent Thorne at JFK Airport confirmed David's suspicions. He was indeed compromised, a long-term asset of Julian Thorne, feeding information to the syndicate from within airport security. His swift apprehension led to further arrests, rooting out corrupt elements within various agencies. In the aftermath, life slowly returned to a new normal for David and Rex. The commendations piled up. The media requests were endless, but David remained the same grounded, unassuming officer. His bond with Rex, however, had deepened into something extraordinary. Their partnership was no longer just professional. It was a profound testament to trust, instinct, and an unspoken understanding that transcended species. Rex, fully recovered from his minor injury, received his own accolades, a special medal for valor, countless treats, and a newfound celebrity among the airport staff and even traveling public. People would stop David just to pet Rex, to thank him, to marvel at the dog who smelled the truth. One quiet afternoon, weeks after the dust had settled, David and Rex were back on patrol at JFK. The airport hummed with its usual rhythm. But now, David saw it through different eyes. Every suitcase, every person, every hidden corner seemed to hold a story. He remembered Rex's initial frantic barks, the desperate plea he had instinctively picked up from Eleanor. He looked down at Rex, who walked confidently beside him, his tail wagging softly. "You did good, boy," David murmured, scratching him behind the ears. "You truly did good." Rex looked up at him, his intelligent eyes reflecting the calm, familiar chaos of the airport. His nose twitched, picking up the myriad scents of travel. But now, David knew. Rex was also attuned to the deeper currents of human emotion, the whispers of hidden truths, the subtle scent of justice finally unleashed. The ethyl-red emerald was back where it belonged. Thorne was behind bars, and countless other criminals were being brought to justice. All because a canine dog barked at a suitcase. Weeks had turned into months, and the frenetic pace of the Julian Thorne case slowly receded, replaced by the comforting, if sometimes monotonous, rhythm of daily life for Officer David Miller and Rex, the German Shepherd who had become an international sensation. Their routine at JFK Airport now carried a different weight, the whispers of their heroic actions. The dog who smelled the truth still occasionally echoed through the terminals. But the initial media frenzy had faded into admiring glances and respectful nods. David's arm had healed completely, leaving only a faint, almost invisible scar, a small, tangible reminder of the perilous showdown in the woods. Rex's grazed shoulder had mended swiftly, leaving him as energetic and vibrant as ever, though perhaps with an even deeper bond of trust with his handler. Their partnership, once a testament to professional dedication, had blossomed into an unbreakable bond of loyalty and shared experience. The fallout from the syndicate's collapse was extensive. Julian Thorne, the once untouchable philanthropist, now languished in a high-security federal prison. His vast wealth seized, his reputation in tatters. The ethyl-red emerald, meticulously cleaned and authenticated, had been returned to its rightful owners, the small European kingdom from which it had been stolen a generation ago. Its return was celebrated globally, a symbol of justice finally prevailing. Eleanor Vance, after providing crucial testimony that solidified the case against Thorne and his network, was granted a new identity and a fresh start. She chose a remote, quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, far from the shadows of her past. In her last communication with David, a carefully worded email sent through a secure channel, she had expressed profound gratitude. "I'm finally free, David," she wrote, "free from the fear, free from the past. My father would be proud, and please, give Rex a very large stake for me." David smiled, knowing he would do exactly that. Eleanor, once a captive of circumstance, had found her true north, her resilience leading her to a life of peace and anonymity. The internal investigation into Agent Thorne at JFK Airport led to a sweeping purge of corrupt elements within the agency. It was a painful but necessary process, restoring integrity to the very systems designed to protect Director Hayes, a man of unwavering principle, personally oversaw the reforms, ensuring that no such deep-seated compromise could ever happen again. He had remained a staunch ally to David, often calling to check in, acknowledging the debt of gratitude the entire federal apparatus owed to an observant K-9 officer and his extraordinary dog. Life at the airport, while outwardly familiar, felt subtly different for David. He still walked his patrols, but now he was more acutely aware of the stories unfolding around him. He saw the nervous travelers, the anxious farewells, the excited reunions, not just as a backdrop to his duties, but as individual narratives, each with their own hidden complexities. He knew that beneath the surface of the mundane, profound secrets could always be lurking, waiting to be unveiled. And he knew that sometimes the most extraordinary truths were revealed not by human ingenuity, but by the intuitive wisdom of an animal. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves outside the terminal began to turn crimson and gold, David and Rex were conducting a routine sweep of the baggage claim area. The conveyor belts hummed, disgorging luggage of every size and shape. Rex moved with his characteristic grace, his nose twitching, taking in the myriad scents of travel. He was a master of his craft, unparalleled in his ability to discern the faint chemical trails of illicit substances. But now, David saw more than just a drug dog. He saw the dog who had scented ancient history, smelled deep human fear, and detected the very essence of a hidden truth. He saw the dog who had refused to be silenced, whose insistent barks had shattered a conspiracy of silence decades in the making. A young family approached them, their daughter, no older than 5, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mommy, Daddy, look, it's Rex, the hero dog," she exclaimed, tugging on her father's hand. The parents smiled warmly. "Yes, honey, that's Officer Miller and Rex. They helped catch a very bad man." David smiled back, kneeling down to the child's level. "That's right. Rex is a very good boy." He patted Rex's head and the dog, with surprising gentleness, nudged the child's outstretched hand with his nose. These interactions had become common. People wanted to connect, to acknowledge the extraordinary David, a private man, had slowly grown accustomed to the attention, understanding that Rex had become a symbol of vigilance, of loyalty, and of the quiet triumph of good over evil. Later that day, as their shift was drawing to a close, David and Rex walked towards their patrol vehicle. The setting sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The roar of departing jets was a familiar lullaby. David looked at Rex, who walked confidently beside him, his head held high. "Another day, boy," he murmured. "Another day keeping everyone safe." Rex looked up at him, a soft whine escaping him. Then he nudged David's hand with his wet nose, a gesture of profound affection and understanding. Their journey together, sparked by a single, momentous bark, had led them through unimaginable peril, revealed hidden depths of human darkness, and ultimately brought about a widespread form of justice. The world was still a complex place, full of shadows and secrets. But David knew that as long as he had Rex by his side, they would continue to be guardians against the unseen, protectors of the innocent, and unwavering champions of the truth. Their story, the K-9 dog who barked at a suitcase and shocked everyone, would serve as a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest signals could lead to the greatest revelations, and that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, courage, loyalty, and an unshakable belief in justice would always prevail.